sin of ingratitude. Another way to put that is the sin of unthankfulness. This doesn't sound like all of that great of a sin in our ears. In our ears we say, okay, it's a sin, but surely it's not that big of a deal, but it is. It really is. You don't have to stand for the reading of a text verse, but I did give you a text verse in Colossians 3 and 15. And we'll come back to that toward the end of this, where it says, "And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also you are called in one body." What are we called to? Peace. "And be ye thankful." Be ye thankful. My favorite service of the year here is the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. And all the service is really about is everybody giving thanks. I love it. And there's something about it. It feels good to the saints of God when all the other saints of God give thanks. It's one of the reasons I like to give you opportunity. Now then, the opposite of thankfulness is unthankfulness or ingratitude. Ingratitude. How serious is it? We're going to go through this. This might be a shorter lesson, but it is a serious lesson. Unthankfulness will lead to ungodliness, and ungodliness leads to destruction. That sounds like sounds like that I'm making a big deal out of unthankfulness. Well, I'm not. The Scriptures do. In Romans chapter 1, and if you're familiar with Scriptures, you know Romans chapter 1 is the path to reprobation, to being reprobate. It says, and I just captured verses 18 and 21, just one little portion of it. And it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men." Now that's what Paul was trying to make sure we knew, that God's wrath is on all righteousness, all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. Now he explains why. He says, "Who hold the truth in unrighteousness." Now he's going to, in this passage, talk about how they looked at who God was and made him into something else, made him into idols and so forth. And so he says, verse 19, "Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen." See, Paul said that we could know about God just from looking around us. "Being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead." So they're without excuse. It says, "Because," in verse 21 is what we center on, "that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, look, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened." And from there, it just goes down the path of reprobation. But where does it start? They didn't glorify him, neither were they thankful. If we're not thankful for who God is and what he's done for us, we will soon become cold to God, and we will start thinking of God differently than he is. That is the road to ruin. So unthankfulness will lead to ungodliness and destruction. I want to stop here for a moment before we keep going into this. It is very, very important that somehow, some way, the older generation instills in the younger generation the importance of being thankful. Now, how do you do so? Well, you're going to have to figure that one out probably on your own. If it's your children and grandchildren, you're the expert. You know what they respond to and what they don't. But it's very important that somehow they understand the importance of being thankful. I encourage you to teach them how to ask God to bless their food. And tell them why that you're teaching them this. Encourage them in their prayers and teach them how to say prayers. Encourage them in their prayers to give thanks to God. Whatever you can do to encourage thankfulness. And I'm sure there's plenty of other ways that you have, but encourage thankfulness. And we're going to see the company that unthankfulness keeps. In other words, the list that it shows up on it. And we have in 2 Timothy in chapter 3 here, a well-known passage. Very well known. It's been preached many, many times concerning end times. And again, it's the last epistle that Paul wrote, and he's writing to Timothy, who he entrusted with all of his. That was the primary person he was mentoring. That was the one he knew was going to come behind him. And he said, this know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come, dangerous times. For men shall be lovers of their own self. And he lists a long list here of the sins of men. Covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. In that long list, that long description of the great sins of the men of their times, there are two that stand out that seem odd in there, and that's disobedient to parents and unthankful. You wouldn't think disobedient to parents would be in that list of horrible sins, but it is. It is. Because that's the very beginning of rebellion against authority. And when I was a teenager and wanted to run and do my own thing, in my rebellion against my parents, I was rebelling against God. I told you, I thank God for His forgiveness. So that's one. But the other one, the one that we're dealing with tonight, is unthankful. Unthankful. God considers it a great thing if we're unthankful. Not a great and good thing, a great and terrible thing if we are unthankful. Now I want to move on to how ingratitude or unthankfulness, how it shows up in Scriptures. And I'm going to deal with murmuring. Most of tonight will be dealing with murmuring. I want you to understand what it is first. Murmuring or complaining. And I've got you a note listed there. The word murmur was derived from how it sounded. How it sounded. When people murmur, you know how they sound? You know, just a low roar. The word grumble is the same way. Grumble was named after what it sounds like. Grumble, 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 grumble. And so when you're murmuring or grumbling, when the Bible's talking about that, it's talking about that level of complaining where you're complaining low because you don't have the guts to say it out loud because you know you're wrong for complaining in the first place. How about that? When do we do that? Well, we do it a lot when we're talking about people in charge of us. I'm talking about either political people or our bosses at work. Has anybody ever been guilty of murmuring and complaining at work? That's probably the thing on my list that hits me the most on this. When I look at murmuring and complaining in my life, where I've probably done the most of it was at work. And shame on me for it. I know better than that. Because all of that is rebellion against authority. And yes, when you're sitting there grumbling, that stupid idiot don't know how to. It's always on a low level. I can't believe I'm working for a bunch of idiots. All of that stuff, it's rebellion. And it has a root in unthankfulness. Rather than thanking God that we get paid to do silly stuff, we grumble about it. Rather than thanking God that we actually have a way to make a living, we complain about our jobs. Rather than thanking God that our nation has a little bit of mercy and a little bit of time to consider its ways underneath leaders who are ungodly. Instead, we rebel against the very idea that God might give us what we deserve. Unthankfulness. Is that the root of it? Y'all with me? And so we're going to look at the first mention of the word murmur in the Bible. And it's in Exodus chapter 15, verse 24. Now, the first 10 chapters of Exodus have to do with all of that great travail. In other words, all of the curses that Egypt went through, the plagues that were upon the land, and all the difficulty of getting the people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt, that great travail, the Passover, and then going through the Red Sea. And then we come out to the other side. And in Exodus chapter 15, we see in verse 24, and the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So they come to a place where the water was bitter, and they murmured. But it wasn't just that they kicked rocks. They murmured against Moses. Against Moses. Moses was the reason they weren't down in Egypt making bricks. Moses is the reason they didn't have a whip on their back just at that moment. Moses was the man God used to get them on the other side of the Red Sea and destroy their enemies. And they murmured against Moses. So the first mention of murmuring in Scriptures is against the same men, and also they murmured against Aaron as well. Same man, the same men who God had used to deliver the same people from bondage in Egypt. Matter of fact, earlier, the same chapter starts off with this same people rejoicing with Moses. So when everything was good, they were happy, happy, happy. Then the first time they had a hard time, they murmured against Moses. I've seen people who got saved and were all happy, and then the very first thing that came up, the very first hard time they had, they complained and griped against the church, the preacher, the song leader, the deacons, everybody down in the church house. It's the same thing. Same thing. I've seen them so happy with this one person who had at that time where they were susceptible to the gospel, had given them the gospel and helped them and helped them to realize that they were lost and got saved, and then had a falling out with that person. It's shameful, isn't it? See, unthankfulness is at the heart of this, and we're going to get to that. A lack of faith is at the heart of ingratitude to bring out. Faith would remember and believe and be thankful. If we have faith, if we understand that my God just brought me across the Red Sea, my God just did an impossible thing and got me out of Egypt, my God changed me from who I was and the person I was, and changed my standing and brought me into a different life where now my desires are different, everything's different. If we can remember that, see, faith remembers, and it believes that it's God that's in charge, and it's thankful. If the people, the children of Israel, could remember that they just got out of the Red Sea, they were just singing about it. First song mentioned in the Bible is the Song of Moses. They were just singing about it. If they only had the faith to remember what God had done, then they could look at this thing and say, this bit of water, we know God got us through a whole sea of water. Surely He can give us water. But they would not remember. It's a lack of faith. It's at the heart of ingratitude. And then we're going to go on in the next chapter, in Exodus 16. And we'll spend a little time here in Exodus because it speaks a lot about murmuring, and in Numbers as well. And Moses here is speaking in Exodus 16. Because the people have murmured and complained so much, Moses has had to go to the Lord about it. And he's coming back and he's talking. He has to now deal with a problem. And he says, and in the morning, and ye shall see the glory of the Lord, for that He heareth your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we that ye murmur against us? Now, shall catch this. And Moses said, this shall be, when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full. See, they've been complaining about they didn't have flesh to eat. That the Lord, for that the Lord heareth your murmurings which you murmur against Him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord. It's very noteworthy right here, and I pointed out that God considered those murmurings against His men to be murmurings against Himself. We have to be very careful when we go griping and complaining and kicking against people who God has put in the place they're at. If a man's called to God, pray for him rather than complain about it. If you're not sure he's called, now this happens. People get into a church and they say, I don't know if that preacher is a preacher. Well, where do you go with that? You go to the Lord. You don't go to your neighbor sitting on the pew. You don't go to your friends down at work and say, preacher, I don't know about that sort of thing. And maybe he's not called of God. Maybe he's in the wrong place. But you're not going to get anything done about it by complaining to your neighbors and your family, and especially to your husband or wife in front of the kids. And you put yourself in danger with God unnecessarily, when you could simply go to God with this thing and ask the Lord, if this man is your man, please strengthen him and help him help us. I mean, do you trust God with these things? Or if He's not your man, please, Lord, send us your man. There's nothing wrong with taking these things to the Lord. What's wrong is when we take them to our neighbors and our friends and our relatives instead of taking them to God. The murmuring and complaining is what the people got in trouble for. So murmuring is never wanted, never needed when it comes to the children of God. It doesn't mean you won't have problems. It doesn't mean you don't have to carry things to God. Sure you do. But complaining is not the answer. And again in Exodus, it says, and the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses, and said, now catch this complaint. Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? They said this a lot. They always complained that we were better off in Egypt. Look at the next one in Numbers 14:2. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, look, the whole congregation, all of them, said unto them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? Oh, poor pitiful me. Oh, woe is me. Oh, it's so hard on me. Complain, complain. Woe is me. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. Thank God. Go eat worms. God hates that. Hates that. That little acting like Eeyore. God hates it. It's not just, and I'm trying to get this to you. It is a big problem in us. If our spirits are complaining spirits, if we look down on everything, if we don't have the joy of the Lord in us, it's a big problem. It indicates some root problems in us. There's a pattern there. And I've written this out for you. It's the same as the child of God saying they had it better off before they were saved, because they said they were better off in Egypt. You know what a slap in the face that is to God? To say I had it better off before I got saved. Say, I wish I could do this, I wish I could do that, but now I'm saved and I can't do it. That's a slap in the face to God. And it's treating the very blood of Jesus Christ as if it's nothing to be walked on. That it's not precious. And again in Numbers 11:1, these next two we're going to start seeing the cost of it. It says, and when the people complained, it displeased the Lord. And the Lord heard it, and His anger was kindled. And the fire of the Lord burnt among them and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. By the way, those were ones on the outskirts and the fringes of the camp. The ones that were barely in there anyhow. There's a whole sermon in there. In Numbers 14:29. And this is the Lord speaking right here. He's speaking through Moses. And this Moses is speaking the word of the Lord. He said, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. This is after the spies brought them a bad report, and they threw up their hands, and woe is me again, and wanted to kill Moses, and complained and murmured one too many times. There is a such thing as one too many times complaining. And again, I'll give you the parallel of you and your children. You remember there was a time when your children whined one too many times. And we can whine one too many times. And so there is a point where God can judge and turn over for destruction those who murmur. And Apostle Paul brought it up out in 1 Corinthians. I have that there as well. In chapter 10, verse 10. He said, neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured. He's talking about this incident. And were destroyed of the destroyer. And that warning went out, by the way, to the church. The church in Corinth. Not to the lost people in Corinth, but to the church. And so God does not like our complaining. Now we're going to go to the New Testament. I just want to bring this out. And you do find that people murmur because people don't change. And the same problems we have in the Old Testament, you find in the New. Give you three instances where the people murmured against Christ and His disciples. That means they complained about not only Jesus, but also the church. said, but their scribes and Pharisees murmured against his disciples, Luke 5 and 30, saying, why do you eat and drink with publicans and sinners? Luke 15 and 2, and the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, this man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. Luke 19 and 7, when they saw it, they all murmured, saying that he was going to be a guest with a man that is a sinner. Now you see the pattern there? They're murmuring and complaining because Jesus was going out with lost folks, going down to the house of the folks that they were unclean. They weren't all dressed up. They weren't right with God. Why was he associating with them? That where they should have been thankful that the gospel reached those that needed it. It's very common in churches, by the way, for us to complain about the way somebody's ministry is, complain about where they're going, complain about who they're talking to, complain about who they brought into church, complain that those people drink, those people smoke, those people chew tobacco, those people cuss, those people ain't dressed right, those people, and so forth and so on and so on. Look, if they're sinners, what do you expect? And Jesus went out to reach to sinners. And so for us to complain at all about sinners and about the gospel going to sinners would put us right there with the scribes and Pharisees. And so we need to be thankful that God is sending his gospel message out to sinners rather than complain about how it's happened. If it doesn't happen our way, we need to thank God he's not limited to our ways. Amen. They also murmured against the word of God. Jesus was talking to them in John chapter 6 and told them hard things. In John chapter 6, 41 says the Jews murmured at him because he had said, I am the bread which comes down from heaven. And I've got a note for you there as well. When we complain because we don't understand the word of God or because it doesn't make us comfortable, it's not our way, that shows that we're thinking God should be molded to us and not us molded to God. You see now how unthankfulness is tied in with pride. Pride. In Mark 14, verses 3 through 5, there's something very important here. Murmuring against worship. There's been a lot of this. I realize that everybody that says they're worshiping is not worshiping. I realize we should point out a difference. But we have to be careful that we don't complain against somebody who's actually worshiping God. Very familiar passage again. It says, being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard, very precious. And she brake the box and poured it on his head. And there were some that had indignation within themselves. You see, they're not grateful. They had indignation within themselves. And said, why was this waste of the ointment made? You understand they considered that being poured upon the head of their master and their Lord to be waste? They didn't realize what they were saying, but they were very foolish in that. For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence and have been given to the poor, and they murmured against her. Now, there are several instances in the scriptures of people murmuring against somebody who's doing right. David danced and Michal murmured. Prodigal son, father, had a feast and his elder son murmured. This woman gave all, and all of them were murmured against and complained against. And it's dangerous to complain against one of God's children. We need to be thankful other people love Him. We need to be thankful that they speak well of His name. Even if they don't know what they're doing, even if they don't know what they're talking about. As far as helping them learn, maybe we can, maybe we can't, maybe it's our job, maybe it's not. But if they love the Lord enough to lift His name up, leave Him alone. Anybody got anything on that? Everybody doesn't hold church services the same, do they? They don't. Everybody doesn't sing the same, do they? Everybody doesn't do a lot of things the same, do they? Leave folks alone. There are things other places do that I don't agree with, and I'll bring that out to you. And we'll settle in what we do here. Now that doesn't mean that I'm condemning other people to hell because they do things different than me. It just means that we're going to settle in on how we're going to do it, and we're going to do it that way. But as far as where they're at with God, that's between them and God. That's not got nothing to do with me. We have to be very careful that we don't run down people worshiping God. Our instructions we find in Philippians 2:14, do all things without murmurings and disputings. We don't need to grumble with each other or with other people. I'm going to be pretty short tonight. I've got a little bit left. Some things that are related to unthankfulness. And I've got 3 listed. And if you have any issue with these 3, you will have a problem with unthankfulness. If you have a problem with unthankfulness, you'll find yourself in these 3. One is doubt. See, because if we have faith, then we can be thankful knowing this verse. You remember Romans 8:28. You've heard it many, many times. It says, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, and to them who are the called according to His purpose. If all things work together for good for us, why should we be unthankful? We may not understand it. It may be painful at the time. It may be difficult for us. But we have no reason to be unthankful if all things work together for our good. Pride, the big problem that we all battle. Because if we're humble, see, nothing, and again this ties in with what we just said, nothing that's bad is undeserved. If somebody comes up and robs me, and that's happened to me several times, not at gunpoint, but I've had my house robbed, I've had my truck robbed, and so forth. Did I deserve that? Well, they were wrong for doing it, but considering all the things I've done in my life, what am I supposed to complain about? Considering I deserve to be in hell, how can I complain about being robbed? Do you follow me? Whatever evil happens to me, it's not that I like it, I certainly don't. It's not that whoever did it had a right to do it, they didn't have a right to do it, but did I deserve it? Yes, and worse. I mean, I don't like it, but I have no right to murmur and complain against God against it. If we're humble, we can realize that. If we insist that we deserve better, we are exalting ourselves. Humility will insist on thanksgiving. I got ahead of myself there. If we're humble, we will insist on thanksgiving. If we are humble at the feet of God, have you ever got a real good correction from the Lord and realized, man, I have messed up. I am messed up. I don't know why God puts up with me. Have you ever felt yourself just down on the bottom, have to look up and see down, as they used to say? When you're down there, you're grateful and thankful for everything that comes along. Humility insists on being thankful. Pride does not consider thanksgiving necessary. A proud man sees no reason why he should give thanks. So pride is tied in as well. Unthankfulness. The last one, I got ahead of myself a little bit on this, bitterness. Bitterness. Or unforgiveness. Which is again also related to pride. Because if we insist, and that's where I got ahead of myself, if we insist that I deserve better, nobody should treat me like that. You can't say that to me. When we insist that we cannot be offended, we cannot be hurt, we turn bitter. If we really understand, again, that we're undeserving sinners. How often do we say that? That we're born undeserving sinners, and the way we were born, the way our actions, everything, I don't deserve the least of God's mercies. We say these things, but do we believe it? Because if we believe that, we can't be bitter. Can't be. We deserve worse. And if somebody's done something to us, then I thank God it was against me and not my neighbor. Isn't that the Christian approach? Thank God that they are belittling me and not somebody else. Thank God that that I'm the one that caught all that grief and not other people. And that's the Christian approach. Bitterness shows that we have pride and we lack thanksgiving. And Paul brings this out in Colossians 3. And again, this goes back to where we first started. It says, put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. And above all these things, put on charity, that's that giving love, which is the bond of perfectness. And then we go to our text verse, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which you are also called in one body, and be ye thankful. What's the key to a good spirit and a kind spirit and a gentle spirit and a meek spirit? Be ye thankful. Be ye thankful. If you're thanking God continually in your spirit, you'll have the right spirit. And so it's the unthankfulness, which is the sin. It's the thankfulness that we concentrate on. The conclusion, the last verse I had there was in Psalms 100, verse 4. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving, into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him and bless his name. Now, this is maybe a little shorter than we've run across the last times, but I did want to bring it out. Thankfulness. Thankfulness is a big, big deal. If you want something to examine yourself by, it's a really good one. How thankful am I? How much do I thank God for what he's doing? Am I bitter or am I thankful? Do I think I deserve better or am I glad for what